Maybe I'm too early recording. Should I stop?
Yeah, you can stop recording and restart at any time.
Okay.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our EMEA office hours, July 25th. We're happy to see you here. And whether you're a seasoned AEM user or just getting started on your journey, this hour is really designed to provide valuable insights, answer any questions you may have encountered or anticipate in terms of a new project you're launching. Today, I'm joined by the 2023-24 class of AEM champions and colleagues. So we have Cindy Underwood joining us, Greg Demiris joining us, and our special guest, Vehab Seth, who is a senior consultant at Deloitte, also a 3-time certified Adobe Master, which is very impressive. And today we're talking about, and we're going to discuss, have a great discussion around performance optimization for cloud-based AEM delivery. So this is going to be an exciting day, and we're happy to have you with us. Take a moment we have 2 QR codes in front of you. Take a moment to join our AEM user group on the left-hand side, and also download this awesome playlist, the AEM Champions playlist on the right-hand side. It is definitely worthwhile and a groovy jam for your workday. So let's get started. I'm going to hand over to Vehab, and we will get going. We'll have a chat. I think everyone is familiar with how to use chat in Zoom, so please leave your questions. We also asked for and fielded questions ahead of time through a form, so we're going to be answering those questions during this open hours, and at the end we'll just go into open Q&A. But feel free to interact anytime. We really look forward to meeting you, having a great discussion, learning together with you, and I'm going to hand over and let's get started.
Thanks, Kelly, for the nice introduction. So let me start by, when we discuss about the performance, the first thing that comes to my mind is that we need to understand about the architecture of the AEM first. Because when we know about the architecture, how it is made, what are different aspects of the architecture that has been defined, where are different published instances resides, what kind of backend storage do we have? So this information help us to understand when we start implementing different components, implementation, we know that these are the aspects that we have to keep in mind when we start about the performance or impedance that we might face in the future. So when we start, the basic comes on the author part. So the performance can be defined on the author as well as the published instances. So when we talk about the author instances, the main performance issues that users might face, or it often comes to different customer implementation, is that the page when the author is altering or authoring is loading very slowly, or different issues might be there. So one of the main things that we have to think about when we create the components, we have to keep it very simple and efficient. That's the basic thing. We don't have to create different components, start nesting them to create more node structure so that it becomes heavy. The second thing can be about the content. So oftentimes we see that there are many different pages that has same content. It might be related to the teaser components. One example can be teaser. Another can be carousel or some listing components where we are showing the same content extracting from different pages. So in that cases, we have to think about a way where we create our content at some one place and then use it or reference it directly on the pages so that we optimize the performance. We don't have to duplicate the contents. So this is one example where we can think about things on the author side. The next thing can be when you think about the server performance on the AEM, the first thing can be is that what kind of API integrations are we going to do? What kind of limitations we might face? So oftentimes when I do the integrations, the most common thing is what kind of library should I start with implementing the API integration? So nowadays the AEM comes with a lot of good libraries. The best one is right now is the client builder factory that many can leverage. They can start creating the instances using it. The second thing can be, oftentimes there's not just single AEM API integration, there are many API integrations. A lot of the calls has to be redundant based on different user requests. So start about creating or using the out-of-the-box libraries more. Second thing is start using the connection pool settings. So there is a way where you can manage different request pools. You start with that thing. You figure out how many requests you might face within your user at the user end, what kind of timeout settings you might want to implement. Are these API integrations resource heavy, or are they just normal GET responses? So we start with these things from the backend side. Then at the end, there are certain advanced concepts within the AEM as well. So for example, workflows that we create to manage automations within the AEM, then we can schedule different jobs. So when you talk about the server performance related to these kind of advanced topics, there is a way where Adobe provides certain services which you can configure, and then automatic jobs triggers in and then cleans all those workflow instances that are often, just completed and are sitting inside the repositories. More often, you will realize that if we have let's say a lot of the times client also often goes for the dynamic media stuff. So when dynamic media, for when the images are uploaded within the AEM instances, a lot of workflows triggers automatically because the asset has to be processed a lot. So when these assets are done, a lot of orphan nodes are created as a workflow completed nodes. So we should always think about having these kind of configurations where we purge these workflows oftentimes. Maybe it should be on the weekly basis, on the monthly basis. So all these factors are defined on the use case to use case basis. If we know that not many images are going to be uploaded in a month, or there are a lot of images that the author or DAM admins are going to upload it every week. So we should configure our configurations in such a way that it should be optimized. So these are few things that we can think about while doing the server-side performance optimizations. And one of the major things when we talk about the optimizations at the user end side, that means the publish instance, is the dispatcher or the cache strategies. There are many caches implementations we have on the server side. That is, first one always comes on top of AEM is the dispatcher. So dispatcher is the layer or the front end layer of the AEM where all the HTML assets cache can be created. So this helps optimize or take out load on the server side. So there are different aspects to dispatcher when you configure it, and now it's become more flexible because earlier when we had that on-premise AEM, then we have to follow a very hard rigid structure to configure our dispatcher. But now when we talk about the AEM as a cloud service, we are more flexible. We can create different files, different farms. Based on different farms, we can have different filters, different rules. So you can manage your code very efficiently at the dispatcher end. So the first thing that comes when you start with the cache optimization at the dispatcher level, that you have to think what kind of cache do we want to keep at our backend side or in that layer. So the basic stuff is that you start by saying that, okay, yeah, HTML has to be cached to make it performant. The second would be the assets. What kind of assets do you need to be cached? Right now, Adobe automatically supports the cloud instances with the blob storage cache. So new instances are automatically enabled for the blob storage caching. But if there was this few years back, I guess one or couple of years back, you have to do it manually. So you can configure it using the cloud environment variables to enable that as well. There is a very good documentation by Adobe where it lists out all those details. I will share in the chat in a few bits. And the second thing is what kind of JSON response you want to cache, what kind of different campaign parameters you want to cache automatically. So these kind of changes we have to think to make more dispatcher optimization. And then on top of the dispatcher comes the CDN level. So the CDN is like dispatcher, but the main job of CDN is to provide a near end cache for geolocated website or geolocated users. So on top of that comes the browser caching. So Adobe now provides different controls as well. So imagine that there is a page that you want to cache on the browser for just 5 minutes, but on the CDN level, you want to have it cached for at least 1 or 12 hours. So if you are using out of the box CDN fastly, then you can control those aspects of those URLs as well. So this is now more easy, more you have granular control over these things. These are the things that I think we should start when we think about the dispatcher or the cache implementation part. There is one more thing I recently found that Adobe has provided one AKL tool. So you can use that stuff and you can download the logs from the productions. If you want to analyze those logs, you can simply load the EKL tool using the Docker. And then you can analyze what exactly are the requests that are being missed out from your CDN or you are missing for the assets. Or when you use the AEM forms, there are certain times that you use themes, and within the themes you might might have uploaded some assets, and those are being missed during the CDN cache. So you can use that EKL tool also to analyze all that cache ratio that you currently have, and you can optimize your performance. What else? Secondly, I think one of the most, when talk about the performance part or the optimization part is to find what are the impediments or the issues that you currently have. Most of the time things work. You don't realize that there is an optimization issue until and unless it has reached a very high level. One use case can be the API calls. So when you start integrating the APIs, it looks simple. You start doing the integration, it works, it wells. But by the time moves on, when you have more users or more AEM requests coming in, going out, you will realize that suddenly the performance of those APIs has gone down or the page is taking too long to load. But you don't know why, what is causing those issues. So the main thing starts by debugging. One of the major tough task in AEM Cloud, I think, is the debugging process. How do you go about debugging these kind of things? Where do you start from exactly in the cloud? Because you just have the logs, right? So you start with the logs, obviously. You figure out what kind of metrics do you want to set for those API calls. You add those in the log information. You start debugging from there. It might be possible that some of these issues are just cause of the configurations that we haven't configured, like I talked before about the connection pools and these things. So this was one thing that we faced in one of our client implementation where suddenly all the calls were taking too much time. And then we saw that there were so many requests and we had a default value for the connection pool. So we have to optimize those parameters as well. So you start by the debugging, and this is where we can see, okay, this is how we can optimize these things. And when we talk about the page optimization, when you load the pages on the client side, the major thing I think we have to keep in mind is that you should have a very good optimized way of including your client libraries. So go with the general recommended way where you load your CSS on your head and then you load your JS part in your footer body. The second thing is you will realize that most often we will use the third-party JS as well, or we will use fonts from the third party, maybe the Google fonts or something like that. So there are ways to optimize those kind of stuff as well. So what you can do to optimize those things is you use the prefetch URL. You can add those fonts in the prefetch of the header and you simply load those domain first. So on the page load, what it will do, the browser will call those domain and resolve them while it is loading your pages. And as soon as the page is loaded, the asynchronous calls will go and it will load your asset much quickly. The second thing is try to leverage the lazy loading as much as possible for the images or assets. Most of the time it happens, and I have seen that our AEM websites are more content and assets heavy. So one of the things that we should or we can optimize these pages is by leveraging the lazy loading. So lazy loading is already provided or supported out of the box. So if you are using the adaptive servlet and out of the box image components, you have the options within the content policies that you can enable it. One more thing that has been released recently or for a couple of years is the asset optimized delivery service. So right now, the new format is not JPEG or JPG, is the WebP. So what you guys can do is just enable those policies, and what AEM will do, AEM will leverage their asset delivery service that will optimize the image on the go. So as soon as you load the page, a request will be gone from the backend to the asset delivery services that will optimize the image according to your responsiveness of the page, and then load the image in the WebP format. So that is the best recommended way right now. And even in the Lighthouse, when you observe your report, you will see that the WebP has been there. And the one more thing, you cannot test the WebP implementations on your local. So the asset delivery is only supported on the cloud instances. So you can check there. What else? There are so many things related to these optimization and everything. Yeah, maybe we can talk about the sling models. So oftentimes when we talk about the backend part, so there is one aspect that we talk about the API integration and all that stuff, but the main part is we start by building the components first, right? So when we talk about the components, now the expected or the recommendation way is to keep your logic within the sling model. Earlier, it was that you could have write your use POJOs or JSPs, but in the cloud instances or the latest on-premise versions, we use the sling model. So oftentimes I have seen that what people does is that they keep their logic, they create one single model, they create all their logic in that init model or the post construct method, and they are done with it. The issue that I found is that when you load so many things within one function, and as soon as the model is initialized, the thing is it will consume a lot of resource. Initially, you won't realize it, but imagine that you have a use case where you create a generic model, and that generic model is going to be used in multiple components. One example can be page model. So oftentimes, if you are using components like article listing or blog listing or maybe teaser, you leverage the page properties of that page because you are using that page as a reference and then pulling out those properties and showing it in a different format, right? So in those cases, you leverage the page component model. The thing is, if you are writing all your logic in one function, that every time that function is every time a component is loaded with a different UI, that function is being called and consuming a lot of resources, which I think is not necessary. The main thing can be, instead of writing all that logic within one function, you can create or keep your logic within separate functions. For example, get date, get modified description, get title from, let's say, 5 different properties and give me one title, right? So all these functions can be defined into separate functionality and then lazy load them. So call those functions only when that is required. So this is one way you can optimize for your Sling model backend logics. And yeah, I guess these are the more things that we can think about while optimizing the backend as well as the front end part. Okay, yeah.
I have a question actually for you. You were talking about a different file format that was being called rather than JPEG or PNG. Is that with dynamic media or just in general?
So in general, when we talk about the images, out of the box supports the asset delivery. So it's called the web optimized image. But on top of that, when you want to have smart tagging or smart cropping features using the Sensei AI, so these kind of things you can leverage using dynamic media. But if you just want to have an optimized image or you need to have the WebP, that can be used without those things. And when you go to the image component out of the box that is provided by the core WCM, and you go to the policies part, you will observe that there are actually 2 checkboxes. The one that says allow the web optimized images, and the another one is called the dynamic media enablement. So if you don't check the dynamic media to check the web optimized image, the adaptive servlets come into play. It sends the image URL back to the asset delivery domain, it gets optimized and gets back to us.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions that people have? Feel free to put it in the chat or even unmute and ask the question yourself. So much great information.
So I have a question, Vaibhav. So if
Yes.
we go back to, I'm gonna go back to the way beginning.
Yep.
And I've taken a lot of notes here. So thank you very much. One asset that comes to us from Adobe is the BPO report. And so anyone who is an admin or probably working with AEM in the cloud, they're getting this report. And I wanted to just kind of talk about that report also as guidance or as indicator to help performance. I know that we receive this monthly. It's telling, it's talking about cash, where you stand in terms of average, what they're seeing across the cloud, and how helpful are you finding that and helping, let's say, clients optimize, or yourself if you're using AEM at Deloitte, and how are you using that as a tool? I mean, we're changing, or let's say optimizing our caching strategy based on that, but not really sure how far we're going to go, because it's difficult to say if we got to where they said that we should be, let's say at a score of 80, one, would we be able to get there, and what would it take? And two, is that going to really help some of the performance issues that we're having? So I'd love to get your insights on that report.
Yeah. So BPO, the business optimization report, yeah, we receive it, I guess, monthly or bi-monthly basis. So oftentimes you will observe that it doesn't contain not only the cache stuff, but other aspects to our AEM implementation we have. So it might also contains that things we often missed out. For example, recently in our business optimization report, we received that Sling has recently changed their service user format. So when you use your service mappings, the format has been changed in the config. So if you are using the deprecated one, those kind of stuff, they also include those reports. But the main point of those reports is to say what kind of optimization do we recently have in our implementation. And one of the major aspect is the cache. Absolutely. So they oftentimes gives you what kind of request are we missing. So it might be possible that we missed out some of the cache headers within the request itself. So it might be going empty. Or it might be possible that the time or cache max age is very small for the expected things. So for example, for the client libraries, the expected cache max age would be around, let's say, 30 days, because it's immutable, it stays there. And now on AEM as a cloud service, Adobe automatically, what it does, it adds a hash value within the CSS or JS files for the client libraries. So the browser cache it, and when the cache is purged, a new hash is generated and it is automatically used or loaded on the page load. So these kind of information Adobe gives us within those reports that can act as a starter for us. You see that these kind of issues Adobe has identified on a very high level for us. And then you can go about and see what you are missing there. And on top of it, as I mentioned earlier, one of the best tool right now is to use the AKL tool provided by Adobe itself. So you download the logs from the production environment, you load those logs within your tool using Docker image that they have, and then it will give you automatically generated dashboard provided by Adobe itself, where you can see what kind of request did you pass. So it might often happens that dispatcher is bypassing those requests, not even considering to have a cache built for them. So you can analyze these are the URLs you missed, and there should be some kind of cache headers for them. It is often possible that some of the requests are just false positives. So there might be a case where you are requesting a JSON response based on some user identifier, and you know that this is dynamic and it change very often, and you don't want to cache it. So in these kind of cases, yeah, you want to bypass it. It is recommended that the cache should be around 95%, but it is not always the use case. It will depend upon different kind of projects yet you have. If you are regularly showing the updated dynamic content, you cannot have a cache for it, right? The best approach for those kind of cases, I would say, would be to use the Sling dynamic include, where a certain part of the website or the page that you have has a dynamic content, and the rest of the stuff is more static content where it is loaded as a cache. So you can implement these kind of strategies. Think about it. Okay, so this is the portion of the page on the header where I'm showing the user information. But at the bottom of the page, it's just simple content where I'm showing the teasers, information about my products. So I will catch these kind of pages. Uh, the second thing that you can see within the ETL tool is what kind of request did you miss? And even they bifurcate these requests into different types, multimedia types. So there will be HTML section. Then at the bottom, there will be section for your multimedia. So it can be related to any assets, be it PNG, JPEG, WebP, anything. And then the third section would be where it will show you the JSON response. Sorry. Okay.
डिलीट हो गया सर ये सब अभी तीन ही जुड़ा था ना
बट वो
Um,
वर्ड में क्या एरर
can
दिया सर
somebody go on mute? We have, or is somebody asking a question, or can someone go on mute? Thank you. As you're talking, somebody has asked for the link to the tool for analyzing the logs.
I will find it. Yep.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. That's great information. And what resonates there also is when you're talking about this dynamic content and like Sling Dynamic Optimizer. So I'm thinking right now, I don't know if anyone joining us today has an AEM Magento integration, but we have Adobe Commerce AEM. We're using it together, and this makes me think that there's a lot of room for optimization. Perhaps there's a lot of dynamic, like changing all the time with categories, and we have solutions. And so we have this absolute part of the page is static, very dynamic based on what an end user is selecting in
Mhm.
terms of product catalog. And I don't know, what are you seeing, I guess, in terms of a commerce, AEM implementations and maybe some known weak points there, optimization? How are you seeing that play out?
Well, Cindy, I don't have much experience with the Magento and AEM integration, but if you talk about these, I can see it as a third-party integration for like a PIM system. So in my recent use cases, I have done it, but it's not the Magento or anything, but a third-party integrations where we get the information from the APIs and then we load those information within our dynamic components. So more often times what we do in these kinds of cases is that we have a template, a single page, which act as a virtual page for all different contents we are going to receive from the API. So in the API, what we have is for our use case, we can say that the API contains different kinds of routes for different component information. So for example, text component having different properties, then let's say a teaser component defining different teaser paths and all those properties related to it, and so on. So in those kind of cases, what I think related to the performance or different impediments would be, so the first thing it comes in mind is that we have a lot of different dynamic components that we have to use using a single API. So you start with integration at the filter level. So in my recommendation would be start with the filter. You create a Sling filter, you do those kind of integrations there, you call the API one single time, and then you store those information within the request. At that point, it is very important to think about that what kind of request or response you don't want to receive at this level. Because if you are receiving a lot of information that is not necessary for the components to render, then you are just increasing the performance or increasing the load on the request attributes. So very first thing that we have to agree is on the contract that the API is going to give us, and this is the only information that we need to render these kind of dynamic components. When you start with this, the second stage would be how do you think about creating different models? Because all those components needs to access those information, and then those components is going to render those information on the UI. So you create generic models out of it. You think that this kind of information is required and can be used by multiple components, and you have to do some kind of processing before using that information. So it might be possible we talk about address information. So within the address information, you receive a lot of, so it might be pin code, it can be street, it can be house number, and so on. So you keep or create generic models, you create functions where it processes those information, because you have to go inside some nested fields to get those information and create, or maybe you have to give a name where you have to add titles and all those stuff. So you create the generic model, you create the implementation, and then when you start with the components, you use or extend those generic models within your component. So now when we talk about the performance is not only about, having better cache or giving O1 complexity for the logics that you are creating. It's also about giving the clear code or maintaining the better code that we have in our components, removing the duplication of the code, keeping the business logic where it should support be and can be leveraged into different components or models. It's a better and good way to optimize certain things. When you start your approach in this way, you are already optimizing your code a lot of times. So this is my take from there, and then it will depend upon use case to use case basis what kind of dynamic implementation you want to have. So it might be possible that you have to do some rendition on the client side. And in that kind of cases, you might want to leverage the Sling exporters. My recommendation would be think about caching those as well. Most of the time, if the information is not related to the user and that information is just, let's say, product related, and you have some kind of identifier within the URL. So you can think about caching those within the dispatcher as well. So yeah, this is
Yeah, that's
my
great. No, thank you. Very helpful. We have a couple of questions here. One is please share the link to the tool. Okay, done. Is there a way to mimic EDS, three-phase loading and AEM sites to improve performance? That's from Rakesh. Thanks, Rakesh.
Hi Rakesh. So if you can elaborate on the EDS three-phase, I'm not very familiar with this topic.
Feel free to hop on. You can unmute.
Yep. So, hi. What I meant was, in the Franklin, there is a to improve the Lighthouse score. There's a three-phase loading, like the lazy loading phase, the phase that contributes to the the LCP part. Three phase in which we can load our component, right? So which is giving us the 100 Lighthouse score for the EDS product. So is there a way to, I know they are completely different architecture, AIM sites as well as EDS. I'm just curious if there is a way to get those three-phase loading, mimicking those behavior in the AEM sites.
Okay. So if I correctly understand you, it's more related to the performance of the lighthouse that we have on our AEM site. I don't specifically know about the EDS three phases, but I can give you my take on this, how we go about the performance issues using the lighthouse implementation. So the first thing that you will always notice is the contextual paint, first contextual paint. So it is often recommended that you use the lazy loading, but the thing is, you should have a balance between these kind of things. So imagine whenever you load your home pages, you have your hero component on the top or some kind of teaser component on the very top. And then below that, you have a lot of content components, image components, and so on. So you think in that way that when you are doing the lazy loading, do the lazy loading for the components that you have beneath the hero component, because the first contextual paint comes from the first view of the page that you have. On the first responsive that you see is the hero image. So you try to load that image as soon as the page has been loaded, and below that you figure out, okay, these are the images that are going to be lazy load because the content has to be seen when the user scrolls down. So this is one way to look at it. And as I mentioned before, there are many requests that happens when you load our pages. So it is related to different client libraries that we are loading, maybe third-party client libraries that we also have, and a lot of fonts based on the business UI design that you have. So in those cases, try to leverage the prefetch calls for those third-party client libraries, as well as for the fonts that you are loading. So this is one way. Second thing can be try to leverage the UI frontend. In my opinion, I have seen using the UI frontend module, you can maintain your front-end code easily, you can use a lot of front-end tools within the npm to optimize your css las files or even the js or typescript files. So what it does when it compiles or convert those kind of client libraries or js into client libraries within the app structure, you have already an optimized minified version of these files. So when you load it, it will take some of the optimization, reduce the burden when loading the network calls. So yeah. Does this answer your question, or was I a little bit different?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, next question is, how can you do server-side processing in the dispatcher? This seems to have been removed in the AEM dispatcher. Yes, earlier it was not, but I haven't touched this topic, but I recently found one release note that AEM released is that they have introduced a new tool or new add-on for our cloud instances called the WAF rules and the CDN functions. Let me just quickly find it and give the links to you. So there they have defined that now you can do certain uh, redirect of the URLs as well as some kind related to the server processing. I haven't deep dived into this topic, but if I find something, I will just post it in your chat. Yeah. Eager, lazy. Next question is eager, lazy, and delayed. It's a good topic. I mean, it's a very vast topic. So eager loading, as I mentioned, this one case where I said that when you load your page for the hero, it's eager because you have to manage that first contextual paint of that page. So in those cases, you will obviously go for the eager loading. So if you are leveraging the image component out of the box via the WCM, you have the option to lazy load or not lazy load those images. So imagine you are creating your hero component and you want to leverage these kind of things. So my take would be to delegate your image implementation to the image component, leverage the properties in the content policies, and then you can manage these kind of settings using the out-of-the-box code. So in those cases, you have now the option via the authoring dialog, simple ear loading the images. For the lazy load, you can obviously use that. So lazy and delayed for me are kind of same thing. So most of the time, try to use the lazy. My take would be that. Because if we talk about one of the complex component that often comes within our customer is the listing component, or you can say filtering component. In those components, oftentimes you will see that a lot of processing has to be done at the backend side where you use the query to figure out what kind of results that you have to show. And then based on some user interactions on the front end side, you can also load the results. And when you are loading these kind of components within your pages, it takes a lot of processing. So in that kind of cases, I would suggest you load a subset of the results, then you apply the lazy loading. So as the user is slowly going down, if it is an SPA kind of page, if the user is going down, you can do the lazy loading. And if the user clicks on different CTAs, then you can lazy load different results. You don't have to call all the results on the front end side and just simply rendering it there. Instead of that, you always call the subset of the results based on the different filtering options you have or different kind of logic that you have, and then you can do a lazy loading in that context. Ganshu, does this answer your question?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. And thanks, Greg, for sharing the URL. And then Rakesh, is there a way to get rid of out-of-the-box HTML elements which gets injected in the DOM from Adobe? It's going to be a lot of, yeah. Not fully, but you can manage it via the CQ HTML attributes. So when you use a resource, you include them, you have an option to remove these kind of wrapping attributes. So there are multiple ways to include the resource. So if you are using the parses, so in that case, what you have to do, you have to go to your component, you define the CQ HTML, and then you can say, don't load the component with any HTML. So there is a configuration. I can share the URL. I don't remember the exact one, but you can control using the CQ HTML tags. And the second option of loading the resources or components within your pages is by using the data slide resource. So in that cases, when you define your resource or you are including it via the path, there is an attribute at the rate context where you can define no wrapping diff. So in that case, what it will does, it will directly include your component from the start point of the HTML that you have defined within the component itself. So these are the two ways you can start and manage your wrapping around the components. I will try to find that data slide one and then we'll share the URL. Does this help your question, Rakesh?
Yes, it would be great if you can provide the links to it as well.
Okay, Divyanshu, we have an attribute cache equals to true with Sling model. What do you think it makes sense to be cache? That's a very good question. I, to be honest, don't know. For me, I think when you load components, the model gets called every time, right? One thing I was thinking about this case is imagine when we were talking about this generic Sling model, right? So when you keep your business logic within a set general Sling model, and then you are using that Sling model to be used within different specific components. Now, what happens when that components call its own Sling model, it will call the general model as well, right? And same happens multiple times. So it might be possible that there are logic that you have to process one time based on the request that you have, because the request contains some kind of user information on which basis you call that API information or something like that. In those kind of cases, I think that it makes sense to cache those responses within the Sling model itself. So Sling model is also a singleton class, I believe. So you get that object and then that same object can be leveraged anywhere where you are extending that Sling model. In those cases, I think using the cache equals to true might benefit, but to be honest, I never tried it and I don't know whether this is the how Sling model stores their cache. But you can, I have seen the Adobe code and there is this function where it tries to get or fetch the Sling model object via the cache first, and then it transfers to the actual implementation using the model factory. So this might be a good use case to try whether the cache is working or not for the Sling models.
Makes sense, Vaibhav. Sure.
Right, great questions. Thank you, and thanks for sharing so generously, Vaibhav. Great discussion, and really just a lot of knowledge being shared there. I have a question, just taking it back to if you've just implemented AEM, let's say, there's a new implementation and you see that page performance is sluggish. Where would you, for a new team, let's say, where would you point out of all this vast knowledge and sharing? There's so many different places and ways to optimize. What would your tips be really for getting started? Kind of what would be your 1, 2, 3 list for anyone new to using AEM?
That's a very good question. And my take would be, if the page is very sluggish, go to the network tab of the browser, check the network calls. So when you load your page, there are numerous calls that is happening on that page. So the first call that you want to look into is the actual DOM call that we have initiated. If it is taking too much time, then we deep dive into it, whether it's the page that is taking itself too much time from the server, or is it the third-party application or numerous calls that we have included in them? It might be possible that we have some kind of JSON call that is synchronous or that is blocking the whole or reducing the performance of the pages. From there, we could go and check for the lighthouse as well. It might be possible that not the page itself, but the different third-party call or client libraries that is loading, it takes time. The third would be, once we figure out whether it's on the front end side or the back end side. So the first thing is to figure out whether it's coming from the back end side or the front end side. Then the second take would be, you check from the back end. Is it the components? If we have only the static components, then it might be the issue lies within the node structure that we have. We are loading so many nodes that automatically AEM is on its peak. But instead of that, if we have some kind of network calls, the best way is to add some logs within those network calls create some kind of matrix out of it, maybe just add the log on the very top, start with the starting time, at the end, just what is the finish time of that particular call, and see if it's taking more than 2 or 3 couple of seconds, then that's the issue that we have. So it's really start with first point to figure out whether it's coming from the backend side or the front end side. Second would be to figure it out whether it's happening on the AEM itself, or is the third party from some server that is happening because of that. Once we figure out these kind of things, then our third would be to actually dive into that particular issue, then figure out what should be the solution, and then we go about it. Hope this answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, because if I think about our handshake with business users within the organization, business dictates a lot, in some cases, site performance, because
Yeah.
there are third-party services that they need to have. There are also, if we're using any cookie banners, we know that, depending on loading time, there can be lag there. So I think it's a really good way to start. And I would just say also, we've seen this through experience. There's a handshake with business. We manage sites, 31 sites across the hemisphere. And often we have business users coming and saying, hey, our agency has said that this is sluggish. And, why is our page performance so low? And so there's also some education in there of what we can control, what we can't control, what we can look into. But very often there has just been this kind of business call. If you have third-party, maybe it's a very common one is a retail finder. So, this is pretty heavy loading, and oftentimes there are problems with the third-party scripts and services that we can't optimize. But it's a good reminder that the third party is very, very often part of the solution, or maybe the challenge at the time, and we don't control that, but we can try to optimize that too. Super. Yeah, very helpful.
Yep.
Anybody else? So we have another question in here. Ooh, a good one. GraphQL, love it.
When using a GraphQL from an AEM service, is there a library that allows a service to query content fragments in the same way that GraphQL does? To be honest, I don't have actually experience with the GraphQL. I haven't used it, but I read something about GraphQL using within the content fragments, right? To be honest, I'm not able to answer this question. Maybe I will try to find it.
It's a problem I've had quite a few times, where we've got a service, we want to get data out of the fragments, but we don't want to go out of AEM back in via GraphQL. We'd like to be able to call GraphQL within a service.
Okay, yeah, I will try to find something, but to be honest, I don't have answer for this one right now.
Right. Any other questions there? Comments?
We do have a couple of questions that came in from the sheet. Do we want to do those?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So here's a question. It says, why is it not possible to add multimedia content, image, video, PDF, directly on pages and sites after having worked in the assets section before?
I mean, it might be something related to the bug or something, but it's not possible to add multimedia directly on the page inside of Environment. So it might be possible that the question relates to the sidebar that we have. So if we have uploaded new assets or something, so oftentimes on the cloud instances, the assets take some time for the processing. So imagine if you have the dynamic media enabled and you uploaded 100 assets in a one go. So it will take time to process them. So if you have uploaded it, and if you are just suddenly going to your sites and trying to see whether it's being there, so you can directly drag it, it might not be visible at the current moment. But after, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes, it takes time, it processes everything, and then you might be able to see it. So I think it might be a case that we just ran into a race condition, or it might be possible that at that time, it might be some kind of bug. But normally it's easy. If you upload assets and there is no much processing, then you can directly drag the assets or see in the site rail to use it directly.
Great, thank you. We have another one that says, could we change edit a new version of an image without losing tags in the assets/Dan repertoire?
Absolutely. I mean, if you talk about creating a new version, that means you are uploading the same image again with a different meta properties or something, or you would change something within the image itself. So yes, when you upload the image, when you click on create a new version, and before that, you already have the image with certain tags attached to it, then those tags will be remained. Because I think what it does when you create a different version, it creates or updates the blob or the asset binary that it has, but it retains those metadata properties that it already has. And if there is something new, it will always probably try to merge those properties instead of removing those things when you are creating on a new version. So yes, to answer your question, you can edit or create new version of the image without losing the tags.
That's good. There is a question, it's a little more generic about server-side rendering. That's the whole question.
So as we talk about the server-side rendering, so my take would be again to think about, okay, so if you talk about the server-side rendering, the most important thing is when you start your components, think about your content hierarchy first, because your components will be leveraging a lot of content from different pages as well. So when we talk about these teaser components, article listing or listing type of components, these leverage the properties or different pages from within the parent page, right? So in those cases, always think about what kind of hierarchy do you want to have. So if I take one example, let's say the article listing. So on what basis do you want to list your pages, right? You want to optimize it. Best way is to keep under one certain hierarchy. Let's say you have a parent page. Within that parent page, you create your different child pages for different blogs and all that stuff. And second take would be try to leverage the out of the box libraries more because it's more optimized rather than creating the queries first. So in most cases, when we talk about these listing components, the logic behind listing always comes from the tag. So tags are a best way to use or optimize your listing components. Create different tags, think about the hierarchy you have, then connect them. You tag those pages with those tags that you have created. Then at the backend side, when you talk about how should we go about using the out of the box libraries to list out these pages, there is a tag manager API that you can leverage. So it's optimized library. You simply go, you define these are the facets on which pages I want to, filter out those pages. You have this root page and you go about that from there. Then as we talked about the sling models, yeah, always try to create specific sling models and generic sling models based on your implementation that you have. But try to create different functions instead of keeping all the logics in just one function so that, as soon as the component is loaded, everything happens. No, that is not the best way, in my opinion, to go about it. Instead of that, create different snippets of logic that you want to have and use them when it is required instead of just doing it on the go. And yeah, that's my take about the server-side rendering. One more thing can be added on top of it. So if we thought about using the Sling exporters or using servlets, then the caching can also be done on those responses. So think about what kind of rules do you want to have on the dispatcher side. Maybe you want to cache the JSON so that, so if we come back to our listing component, when you try to do the listing component, you will observe that there are multiple ways you want to handle those things. One thing is the response is coming from the server side, yes, but there might be some interactions on the front end. For example, if we enhance the listing component and make it a filter component. So now you have small facets on the top where the user can click on that. So when the user clicks on that, the response again has to come from the backend side, and then the response will be converted to the UI and the UI will be generated. So in those type of cases, again, I would suggest you leverage the Sling models because your Sling model already had that logic. You can just reuse that one. And to make it more optimized, just cache the JSON model response that you receive. So these are the few aspects I think people can look into when they think about server-side rendering.
A couple more questions. Do you see them there? Do you want to answer them?
Okay, at the bottom.
There's mega menu is always challenging. Right, a lot of elements and configurations, performance issues. Any tips on success building it?
Yeah, mega menu. I mean, the navigation is always a challenging part. Yeah. So if we talk about the navigation, so AEM already provides us one of the navigation component as an out of the box component. My take would be if we have a simple navigation where we are just listing out the pages and all that stuff. So you leverage the out of the box one. So I guess you get 4 options. You can also add a predicate query within it. You can do the searching based on the tags, as well as there is a route, and there is one more thing. So if your implementation suffice these things that are provided by out of the box component, you leverage that. But if we talk about a mega menu where we want to show some external URLs as well as some of the internal URLs that we want to have, and on top of it, we want to modify the URLs and do some kind of processing on top of it. It can be numerous things. So on this, I would suggest you think about the hierarchy again first, because oftentimes when we are trying to list those URLs within the navigation, it follows some kind of hierarchy. So there will be level 1, then on top of it, there will be level 2. It might be possible that there is level 3, but it's just a placeholder pages, and then before it or after it, level 4 is coming on. So it's very important you define your hierarchy, you define what kind of placeholder template pages you want to have between them. And then on top of it, you start thinking, okay, this is how I will write the logic to go about it. You can leverage the page manager APIs in those kind of cases. You get the root page, and then below it, you can just query how much depth you want to go and get all the child pages as a list from the APIs itself. So again, now you are leveraging the out of the box APIs. The third thing, as I said, there might be use cases where you want to process those URLs. You might want to add certain, prefix before after the URL, or you want to add some selectors, or there can be numerous cases. So in those cases, I think a couple of years back, Adobe Core Component introduced one open implementation called Link Manager. So now most of the components use that link manager as a service. So what you can do within your Sling models, you can use that link manager and rate it with @self, and then it gets initialized. Now using that link manager, you have options of using different attributes as well as a function where you can modify those URLs. So you have 3 options, I think. You can either directly provide the path, you can provide the resource itself, and there is one more options. So it's kind of a centralized location for handling all of your link related utilities or business logic. So you can also look into it to optimize your or simply creating a mega menu. So, anything else there? Yeah, I think these can few takes from my side on when you are building the navigation component. And one thing, keep the dialogue as simple as possible. There are often times when the client comes and say there are these many requirements. We want to have this, we want to have that, but it's just too much. So you might want to explain to the clients that there are things that we can do within the AEM, yes, but it might not be beneficial for the authors, because if you have so much things within your single dialogue, it's too much cluttering for your authors. So instead of saying that add everything within manually, just try to come up with a logic, try to get a balance between the automation and the manual part and create something out of it. That would be my take for the mega menu. Hope this answers your question.
And there's one more. What are your thoughts on how can a search page be optimized when it uses query parameters and thus cannot be cached in the dispatcher?
Okay, so pages with the query parameter can actually be cached within the dispatcher itself. It's not a recommended way. So what you can do when you are starting or creating your dispatcher configurations, there is a way where you can mention to ignore these query params. So I think it's ignore query params, something like that. And you can define your query parameters that should be cached. So this is oftentimes recommended for the marketing campaign request. So there is a very big list for all these query parameters from Adobe itself. You can now, I think if you create your new project with the new archetype, you get all these lists directly. But even if you don't have it, you are using your old one, you can simply copy those lists and include in your dispatcher settings. So these are often recommended for the marketing, or in some cases, they are required that you cannot go with any other way. But my take would be, instead of using, if you are implementing your own logic, and if you can use the selectors, go with it. So selectors are a better way, recommended way in the Adobe. So when you are creating your pages, you are defining your URL formats. If it is possible, use the selectors, or you can make it a mixture of selectors as well as the suffix. So those things are actually automatically cached for the dispatcher part, and that might be the best way to go with it. If you need query string on the publish, then you can't cache it. But if you need on the client side, then you can use the ignore param. Yeah, that might be there. The best way would be to remove the query params and allow the whitelisting using the partial rewrite. Yeah, so as I said, you can leverage the rewrite to create the URL format in such a way that it uses a combination of the selectors as well as the suffix. Avoid using the query parameters if it is avoidable, but if not, then yeah, go with the allow query params.
Great. Fantastic. So we're at time. That was you must need a glass of water by now. That was a
Yes.
lot of that was a lot of Q&A, like rapid fire. Well done.
Yep.
Very interesting. This will be recorded and shared. So it'll be available to everyone who's joined, and then also afterwards for sharing. I'm going to share the link here where you can find anyone who's participating can find previous meetups also and recordings. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise, sharing your experience, and really wrapping your head around a lot of questions. I know the community appreciates it. I've learned a lot. I'll be rewatching this recording and diving in, because there's a lot of knowledge and nuggets here to move into. So a big thank you to everyone. Thank you to our organizers, to Greg and Rami, who's not here. Also to Cindy for supporting, and the AEM champions, and to all of you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you at our next AEM EMEA office hours after summer. We'll share the next date coming up. But until then, we wish everyone a great holiday break. If anyone's going on vacation, I guess maybe a few people.
Everyone. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Baba. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Yep.
Thanks,
for
everyone.
Thank you. It was amazing. Great job.